During a fun, casual interview on Jimmy Fallon's show, the mood flips when a nervous fan suddenly walks on stage and hands Keanu Reeves a sealed letter. As Keanu reads it, the studio falls silent. The message reveals a shocking connection from his past that no one, not even Keanu, expected to confront on live TV. The night that wasn't supposed to change anything. It started on a night that was meant to be ordinary, at least for television. Another bright studio, another famous guest, another crowd that came to laugh and then forget they were ever there. The New York skyline glowed on the backdrop behind the stage, but backstage the light was softer, quieter. Keanu Reeves sat alone for a moment in the small green room, elbows on his knees, hands loosely folded, breathing in that strange mixture of coffee, hairspray, and nervous electricity that lives in every TV studio. He had done this 100 times, press tour, interviews, late-night couches, and yet something in his chest still tightened the same way it did before his very first talk show appearance decades ago. He glanced at the framed photos on the wall, all the smiling faces of past guests, and then down at his own hands. People called him a legend, an icon, a miracle of Hollywood survival. He never felt like any of those things. In his own mind, he was still the quiet kid who spent more time in libraries and on motorbikes than at parties, the man who had lost more than he ever talked about, just trying his best not to waste the time he'd been given. A soft knock at the door pulled him back. A production assistant, barely in her 20s, peeked in, eyes wide with the kind of nervous awe that made him uncomfortable and oddly protective at the same time. 2 minutes, Mr. Reeves. Can I get you anything? Water, tea, coffee? He stood up at once, shaking his head with a small, grateful smile. Keanu, please, and I'm good, thank you. You doing okay? Big night. She blinked, surprised that he'd asked about her instead of rattling off a list of demands. Yeah, just first week on the show, she admitted, clutching her clipboard a little tighter, trying not to mess anything up. You already did something right, he said. You knocked on the door. The joke was gentle, and his smile took the sharp edge off her fear. You'll be great, one step at a time. Her shoulders dropped a little, the tension leaving her body. Thank you, she murmured, and as she backed out of the room, she carried a tiny bit more confidence than she'd had when she walked in. Keanu watched the door close, then let out a small breath. Kindness didn't cost him anything. The world had been hard enough on all of them. When they called his name to stand by at the curtain, the old familiar wave of anxiety rose again. He never quite understood why people cared so much about what he had to say. He was just an actor, a man who fought his own shadows when the cameras were off. But he reminded himself, you show up, you do your best, you try to leave people a little better than you found them. That had carried him through darker nights than this. Out on the set, Jimmy Fallon was already warming up the crowd, tossing out quick jokes, laughter rolling through the studio in easy waves. The band played a bright, playful riff that buzzed through the stage floor under Keanu's boots. A stagehand clipped the small microphone packed to the back of his jacket. Another smoothed a wrinkle on his sleeve. He thanked each of them by name, as he always tried to do. These people were the invisible scaffolding that held the whole crazy machine together. When his cue came, the curtain opened to a wall of light and applause. Keanu stepped out, that shy, slightly crooked smile breaking across his face as he waved to the audience. They stood, some of them clapping harder, cheering like they'd just seen a hero walk into battle. He never quite knew how to hold that kind of love. It felt too big and he felt too small. Still, he bowed his head in thanks because gratitude was the only honest response he had. On the couch, the conversation started light. Funny stories from set behind-the-scenes mishaps, impressions of directors and co-stars. Jimmy leaned into every word, laughing, nudging the audience to laugh along. Keanu answered with that careful, thoughtful rhythm he had, pausing just long enough to show he actually cared about what he was saying, even when it was just about dropping a prop gun or forgetting a line. But underneath the jokes, there was a quieter layer. When Jimmy asked about how he kept going after so many personal losses, the room seemed to lean closer. Keanu hesitated, his eyes dipping down for a second, the ghost of old pain passing over his face before he could smooth it away. "I don't know if I keep going better than anyone else," he said softly. "I just try to remember that every day I get to wake up is a gift I didn't earn. And if I can make someone's day a little lighter, even for a moment, then maybe it means something." The audience fell into a brief hush before applauding, some faces already shining with emotion. On the monitor offstage, crew members watched with unexpected tears in their eyes. Even Jimmy, usually all energy and quick jokes, sat a little quieter than usual, his expression warm and sincere. From the third row, a young man in a faded cap and a worn denim jacket listened with a different kind of intensity. His hands were clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white. He wasn't just a fan who loved the movies or the memes or the internet stories about Keanu's kindness. For him, this night had been waiting for years, carried like a weight across every city he'd moved through, every cheap apartment and night shift and long bus ride. The ticket he'd used to get into the studio was creased from being folded and unfolded so many times. In his jacket pocket, a single envelope pressed against his heartbeat. As Keanu finished his answer, the young man swallowed hard, feeling the words scrape against memories he had tried to bury. He could hear the laughter and applause around him, but it all sounded far away, like it was underwater. His chest burned with a question he had asked himself 1,000 times. If you had the chance to thank the person who changed your life without knowing it, would you be brave enough to take it? On stage, Jimmy turned to the camera for a quick throw to commercial, already shifting into his usual high-energy rhythm. The band kicked up a playful tune. The studio lights danced over the audience, inviting them to stay excited, stay loud, stay part of the show. People reached for their phones, whispering to each other, buzzing from the thrill of seeing a movie star up close. The young man in the denim jacket stood up. Security noticed the movement immediately. One guard near the aisle straightened, a hand going to his earpiece. The floor manager frowned, halfway between shouting and staying calm for the cameras. No one was supposed to leave their seat, not while the band played, not while the guest was still on stage. But the young man was already stepping into the aisle, knees shaking, fingers closed around the envelope like it was the only solid thing in the world. He could feel 100 eyes turning toward him, confusion rising like a wave from row to row. Somewhere, a producer hissed, "What is he doing?" into a headset. Keanu, still on the couch, felt a strange pull and looked up just as the young man began walking toward the stage. One step, then another, his lips trembling around words he hadn't yet found the courage to speak. The band's music faltered for half a second, and in that fragile, uncertain pause, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. The walk to the stage. The studio air tightened as the young man stepped into the aisle, like somebody had reached over and turned down the oxygen. The band kept playing, but the melody sounded suddenly nervous, a little too bright for what everyone's eyes were watching. People shifted in their seats, murmurs rolling through the rows as he moved closer to the stage, his jaw clenched, the brim of his cap shadowing his face. Security reacted on instinct. One guard moved to block the bottom of the stairs, another came up from the side, hands out in that calm but firm posture that said, "Sir, you need to sit back down." The floor manager started waving frantically, her headset crooked, trying to catch the band's attention, Jimmy's attention, anyone's attention. This was live television, or as close to live as it got, and nothing made people in headsets more afraid than something they hadn't planned. Keanu saw all of it at once. The guards, the fear building in the audience, the producers starting to panic, and then he saw the young man's eyes. They weren't wild or angry. They were wet, terrified but not dangerous. His right hand was raised, not in a fist, but holding a single white envelope, edges bent from being carried too long. Jimmy half rose from his chair, torn between safety and the instinct to turn everything into a joke. "Whoa, hey, buddy," he called, voice still light but with a strain under it. We're gonna get you a mic if you want to audition for the band, okay?" Some people laughed, more out of habit than amusement, but the young man didn't even glance at him. His entire focus was fixed on Keanu, like he had been walking toward this one moment for years, and everything else in the room was just background noise. "Sir, you need to take your seat," the closest guard said quietly, stepping in front of him at the foot of the stage. "You can't be up here." The young man stopped, his shoulders shaking. For a second it looked like he might turn around, apologize, disappear back into the crowd, and carry his unfinished courage home with him. But then his fingers tightened around the envelope, and he forced out a single, hoarse sentence. It's for him," he said, nodding toward the couch. "Please, it's important." The envelope trembled in his hand. From the stage, Keanu noticed the tremor, the way the young man was trying not to fall apart in front of everyone. He recognized that look because he'd seen it in the mirror before auditions, at hospital doors, at funerals he hadn't wanted to attend but knew he had to. It was the look of someone whose fear was almost louder than their reason, but not quite. The studio suddenly didn't feel like a show anymore. It felt like a crossroads. Keanu leaned forward on the couch, elbows on his knees, ignoring the tiny voice of the director coming through the speakers hidden in the set. "Don't engage. Stay seated. We'll cut to break." He could almost hear the network lawyers in that voice, their concern wrapped in words like liability and protocol. "Let him up," Keanu said, his voice steady but gentle. Jimmy turned to him, eyes wide. "Are you sure we can?" "It's okay," Keanu replied, and there was something so calm in the way he said it that even the band's guitarist, fingers hovering uncertainly over the strings, let out a slow breath. Then he looked at the guard. "It's okay, please, let him come up." There was a beat of hesitation, the whole studio hanging between policy and the quiet authority in Keanu's tone. The guard glanced toward the wings, waiting for someone higher up to overrule the movie star. No one did. Somewhere off stage, a producer swore under his breath and then said into his mic, "Fine, keep cameras wide. Nobody cut, just stay on it." The guard stepped aside. The young man seemed almost startled that the path was suddenly open. For a brief second, he looked like a kid again, unsure if he was allowed on the grown-ups side of the playground. Then he drew in a shaky breath and climbed the few steps to the stage, each footfall echoing louder than the band's music, which had softened to almost nothing. Keanu stood up to meet him. Up close, the young man looked even more fragile. His denim jacket was clean but worn at the elbows, like it had been his favorite for a long time. His eyes were rimmed red, not from the bright lights but from something older. He stopped a few feet away, swallowed hard, and seemed to forget every sentence he had rehearsed in his head. I'm sorry," he managed, glancing back at the audience who were now staring at him as if he'd stepped into their living rooms uninvited. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I didn't know how else to do this." Keanu shook his head lightly. "You're here now," he said, voice low, almost private despite the microphones. "What's your name?" "Leo," he whispered. "My name's Leo." Jimmy, still perched on the edge of his chair, watched with the same stunned expression as the crowd. Nobody was laughing anymore. Phones were half raised, then lowered again, as if even the most social media obsessed among them felt that filming this would somehow break it. Leo held out the envelope with two trembling hands. "It's not from me," he said. "It's from someone who isn't here anymore. She wrote it for you a long time ago, and I promised I would give it to you if I ever got the chance." His voice cracked on the last word, and he had to look down to steady himself. "You changed her life, and you don't know it." The envelope looked painfully ordinary between them. Plain white. No decoration, no fancy paper. Just a name written across the front in careful blue ink. It was Keanu's name. For a moment he simply stared at it, feeling a ripple of unease move through him. There were always letters, fan mail, scripts, contracts. But this felt different. It felt heavy, like whatever words were inside it had been carried through storms before reaching his hands. "Do you want me to read it later?" he asked softly, giving Leo a way out, an option that would let him escape the scrutiny of thousands of eyes. Leo shook his head, tears spilling over despite his efforts. "No, please, if you can read it now." He glanced toward the cameras, toward the sea of strangers. She always said the truth matters most when people are watching. In Jimmy's ear, the director was shouting, "We can't vet this, we don't know what's in it. Cut to commercial, cut now." But Jimmy didn't move. He was too caught in the rawness of the moment, in Leo's shaking hands and Keanu's quiet, searching gaze. Keanu took the envelope. The paper was warm from being held so tight, the folds softened by years of handling. He turned it over once, thumb brushing the sealed flap, feeling a faint bump where the pen had pressed a little too hard into the page inside. Somewhere in his chest, an old grief stirred, that familiar ache that came whenever the past reached into the present without warning. He looked up at Leo, at the cameras, at the crowd that had come to laugh, and was now afraid to even breathe. "If it's okay," Keanu said gently, "I'll open it." Leo nodded, speechless. On the monitors around the studio, the image cut to a tight shot of his hands breaking the seal. The band's music had stopped completely. The only sounds were the tearing paper, the faint hum of the lights, and the pounding of 100 hearts that somehow all fell into the same uneasy rhythm. Keanu unfolded the letter. His eyes moved over the first line, and in an instant the expression on his face changed, from cautious curiosity to something that looked very much like being hit from the inside. Jimmy leaned closer, his voice a bare whisper that still carried through his mic. What does it say?" Keanu swallowed, his lips parting as he tried to find his voice. Whatever he had just read in that opening sentence was not what he, or anyone in that room, had expected. And as he looked up at Leo, his eyes shining now for a completely different reason, everyone in the studio knew they were about to hear something that would not be forgotten. The words that should have been impossible. The first line of the letter was written in slow, careful handwriting, the kind that comes from someone who has rewritten the same sentence too many times. "If you are reading this, it means I never found the courage to say thank you while I was alive." Keanu read the words out loud, his voice rough around the edges. A small gasp rippled through the crowd, like a single breath that had been shared by hundreds of people at once. Leo's hands were clenched together now, knuckles pressed hard against his lips as if he were holding back a flood. The next sentence came softer, but it hit even harder. "My name is Isabel, and years ago you saved my life without ever knowing my name." Keanu's gaze lingered on that name for a long second. Isabel. He whispered it under his breath, testing it, trying to pull some buried memory into focus. Faces, locations, old film sets, chance encounters in coffee shops and airport terminals, all of them flashed through his mind in a blur. None of them settled. The not knowing hurt in a way he hadn't expected. He read on. I was 27, a single mother working as a cleaner on one of your movie sets. I had 2 jobs, no sleep, and more debt than I could see over. I was angry at everything, at God, at the world, at myself, for not being stronger. I didn't smile. I didn't talk to anyone. I just pushed the mop, picked up the trash, and tried not to think about jumping in front of the first train that came into the station near my apartment. The studio lights felt impossibly bright as those words filled the silence. Jimmy's face had lost all trace of the host's mask. He looked only like a man hearing a story he didn't know how to carry. In the 3rd row, someone covered their mouth with both hands, eyes brimming. Keanu paused, his own breathing shallow now, and looked up at Leo. Isabel, he said quietly, she was your... My mother, Leo managed, voice breaking on the word. She was talking about when I was a kid, before they got better. The letter went on. One night, after everyone else had gone, I was cleaning the hallway outside your trailer. I remember thinking how easy it would be to disappear and how nobody would notice. I didn't know that you were still inside, that you were sitting alone, same as me. The door opened. You stepped out, tired, still in costume. I froze because people like me aren't supposed to be seen by people like you. At least that's what the world had taught me. But you looked right at me, not through me, not past me, at me. Keanu blinked hard, and for a second his composure slipped. A fragment of memory surfaced. A narrow hallway, the dull smell of bleach, the echo of his own footsteps late at night. A woman with dark hair pulled back too tight, sleeves rolled to her elbows, eyes so exhausted they looked almost bruised. He had been heading back to his trailer, body heavy from the day's work, heart heavy from reasons he hadn't spoken about. He had seen her and felt that same ache he always felt when he recognized the kind of tired that went deeper than the body. He remembered stopping. He remembered saying, "Long day." And he remembered the surprise in her eyes when he asked, "Do you have someone waiting for you at home?" Back in the present, his hands shook slightly as he continued reading. You asked if I had someone waiting at home. Nobody had asked me that in years without sounding like they wanted something. I told you, just my boy. You smiled and said, then you're doing the hardest, bravest job there is. You told me that your work looked big on screens, but that what I did mattered just as much because someone small was counting on me to come home. I laughed at you, can you believe it? I actually laughed in your face. I told you I was tired of trying, that nothing I did made a difference. You didn't flinch. You didn't tell me to cheer up or be grateful. You just nodded and said, it's okay to be tired, it's not okay to believe you don't matter. And then you did something I never expected. Keanu felt his throat tighten. He didn't need the letter to tell him what came next. The memory had snapped into place, now like a photograph found in an old drawer. He had taken off the jacket he was wearing, some expensive, perfectly tailored piece of wardrobe, and draped it over her shoulders, even though she had protested. He had slipped 2 folded bills into the pocket, nothing that would change her life, but enough for a week of groceries. He had told her it was from the craft services table, a tip from the universe, and begged her not to argue because then he'd feel awkward and she'd feel guilty, and nobody needed that. He had said, use it for your boy or for yourself. Buy something that tastes like joy, even if it's just ice cream. He had almost forgotten. She had never been part of the stories people told about his kindness, the ones the internet loved to repeat. She had been one small moment in 1,000 days. To her, it had been everything. You gave me your jacket, the letter confirmed, as if reading his thoughts. You put money in the pocket and made a joke so I wouldn't cry. And when I told you I was too tired to keep going, you looked at me like I was the one on the movie poster and said, "Then rest, but don't quit. Little eyes are watching and they need to see you stand back up." I went home that night and used the money to buy my son, Leo, his first real birthday cake. Until then, we'd only ever had day-old donuts the bakery would throw away at closing time. He still remembers the candles. I remember something else. I remember that the station where I had planned to end my life was closed that night for maintenance. I never went back. Leo was openly crying now, tears slipping down his face as he listened to words he had probably memorized long ago. Keanu's own eyes were bright, his jaw set like he was fighting to hold himself together. Around them, the audience sat in stunned silence. No coughs, no shifting, no nervous whispers, just listening. "She got better for a while," Leo said softly, filling in the space between sentences. "She went back to school at night. She stopped talking about giving up. She always said you didn't save her because you were a movie star. You saved her because, for 5 minutes, you treated her like she mattered." Keanu lowered the letter slightly, looking at Leo as if seeing the small boy hidden behind the grown man. He had to stop, steady his breathing, then try again. "I'm so sorry, I never knew. I should have remembered more. Leo shook his head quickly. "You didn't have to remember, that's the point. You were kind when there was nothing in it for you. That's what she wanted you to know." Keanu lifted the page again, and his eyes caught on the next lines. The tone of the handwriting shifted. The letters pressed a little deeper into the paper, as if Isabel's hand had started to shake when she wrote them. "But if, by some miracle, you are holding this letter, it means my time ran out before I could say these words to your face. It means Leo found the courage to do something I never did. It means that whatever happens next, he chose life." Keanu stopped. He read the sentence again, silently this time, the meaning sinking slowly into his bones. "Whatever happens next," he repeated under his breath. On the page, just beneath that line, the next words waited, the ink slightly smudged, as if a tear had fallen on them years before any of this night existed. Keanu's eyes widened as he read Isabel's final warning to him, a truth she had buried at the bottom of the page like a secret too heavy to carry alone. And before he could decide whether to say it out loud, Leo reached forward, fingers brushing the edge of the letter. "There's more," Leo whispered, voice shaking. That's the part I've never heard anyone else read, the part about why she really wrote this, and about what she was afraid would happen to me." The audience leaned in as one, every heartbeat synced to the tension in Leo's voice, to the shock tightening Keanu's features. On the paper between his hands, Isabel's final confession stared up at him, a single paragraph that would change the way he saw this stranger and himself forever.